That Penn State schedule is now an uphill battle all of a sudden, and you lose Drew Aller for the year. That's some bad news right there. Welcome back, everyone. This is Bando's Breakdowns, episode 64. My name is Zain Bando. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. We are at the midway point in the month of October. I can't believe I'm even remotely saying it, but we have made it to that time of the year where fall is in full force. It's the only month of the year where all four major sports are taking place at the same time, and there's just so much excitement, so much going on, so much to look forward to. I'm excited to bring it all to you guys today here on this episode. We'll be talking a lot about college football, NFL football, combat sports, and so much more like we usually do. We were going to get into some baseball, but I just don't think we're going to have the time with all of the news and notes that we will be going over. But before we go over anything, we need to take care of some particulars first. Please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. In order to do so, you can go to youtube.com/EDB Network. It would be very much appreciated if you guys subscribed. We're a little over 1,000 subscribers. The more you subscribe, like, share, hit the notification bell, the more it stays in the algorithm, the more it tells me that you like content like this. So if you guys could go ahead and do that, I would greatly appreciate it. You can listen to Bando's Breakdowns wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, and so much more. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention that this show is presented by Playback and Novik. Stay tuned for messages from both later on in the show, as they both have been integral parts of building this network and getting it to where it is. And again, Bando's Breakdowns is presented by Playback. So with all that being said, and without further ado, let's get started with what we're going to be talking about today. And that is going to be a lot of stuff. So getting into Zain's overview, what we're going to be discussing, we will be talking about James Franklin's firing from Penn State within the last couple of days. Bombshell news across the world of college football. What does it mean for Penn State? What does it mean for the Big Ten? What does it mean for college football overall? We're also going to talk about an interesting coaching candidate who hasn't been in coaching for quite some time, but may be working his way back onto the market. So that remains to be seen as well as to whether or not this coach that I'm keeping hidden for now will actually make his return to college football. So that'll be interesting to talk about. We'll go over what happened in week 7 of college football. We'll go over Illinois' 34-16 loss to Ohio State. We'll go over some nuggets about what Bret Bielema told the media during the team's bye week this week. They have no game. Illinois does not play until a week from this Saturday when they go to Washington to try to salvage its season and have a shot to win 10 games against a Washington team that's only lost once at home since 2021. We'll talk about that. We'll also recap UFC Rio. We'll preview UFC Vancouver and a few other incidentals as well, a few other news and notes of some things that I saw across sports this week and a few other things. We'll also preview the Bears and the Saints following the Bears' win on Monday night, last-second field goal over the Commanders. But let's get started. James Franklin fired at Penn State. It's known by now. It's a couple of days old, but I have to react to it. Huge news. Penn State was a preseason number 2 team in the nation and has faltered to a 3-3 slide through 6 games. And again, extremely disappointing stuff on the part of Penn State. Obviously, they had so much expectation to go back to the playoffs. Some were even saying they were a national title contender. Now all that can be thrown out as the ESPN Football Power Index has Penn State at a 0.1% chance to make the playoff. That's staggering in itself. What else is staggering is Drew Aller is out for the season with a leg injury, suffered late in the 22-21 loss to the Northwestern Wildcats, who have quietly won 3 games in a row, entering a huge game to honor the 1995 Rose Bowl team this Saturday against Purdue. Now that we kind of know a little bit more about the fallout of James Franklin's firing, we are going to listen to a fascinating take from ESPN's Greg McElroy as to who he believes will replace Pat Fitzgerald in this, or excuse me, or I just gave it away. Who will replace James Franklin? And that is the possibility that former Northwestern coach Pat Fitzgerald could be in the running for that position. He's an outlier, given some off the field things that have occurred over the last couple of years, things to where he has now settled with Northwestern over the hazing allegations in 2023. But nonetheless, though, it seems like he wants to get his foot back into coaching. Could State College be a place for him? And McElroy says, yeah, why not? So let's listen in to his opinion as to why McElroy believes that Pat Fitzgerald is a worthwhile fit, and it's a fit that I don't think a lot of people are really fully digesting. So I thought it was extremely interesting. Let's take a listen into it because he kind of goes deep here as to why he believes Fitzgerald is a worthwhile candidate. And again, this is courtesy of ESPN. He was doing a hit for them the other day. So let's listen into what Greg McElroy, the host of Always College Football, I had to say about all of this fallout from Penn State and why he believes Fitzgerald could be a worthy candidate. Here we go.
Greg, I don't want to know the guy you think is going to get it. I want to know the best candidate for this job in your mind right now.
I'm going to go with Pat Fitzgerald, and he is the former coach of the Northwestern Wildcats and was famous in his time as the head coach there of doing more with less. Very few in the country were able to overachieve the way Pat Fitzgerald did in his 17 years. Frankly, he led them to the highest highs ever, and while the end of his tenure, there was some scandal, but at the end of the day, it was resolved, and Northwestern ended up having to pay Pat Fitzgerald for firing him at the time. So now that that's clean and behind him, he becomes a very intriguing candidate for many, many jobs, and I think he's a perfect fit for Penn State. He has great understanding of the Big Ten. I think he's well liked by those decision makers there in Happy Valley. And I think he could instill the type of mentality necessary to get Penn State over the top and hopefully at some point beat some of those teams that have been in the way the last 10, 12 years.
So fascinating stuff there from Greg McElroy, and definitely a outlier of a possibility there if Fitzgerald were to actually become the new coach of the Penn State Indian Lions. And what I think is even more fascinating about this whole thing is, what is stopping them from hiring him? I mean, it's clear, as McElroy just said, all that stuff is behind him now. It doesn't make sense. I'm not so sure. I think they would need a polished name. What McElroy fails to mention in that is Fitzgerald's final 2 seasons at Northwestern. He was 4-20. So that tells me a lot of things. And what it also tells me too is, maybe the baggage being carried with him is maybe not a surefire thing. And what else doesn't seem to make sense to me either is, I think you'd want a more winning coach. Northwestern hadn't had a winning season under him since I think 2020. Of course, he was let go after a 1-11 year in 2022, where the team was just awful. The only game they won was outside of the United States against Nebraska, and Nebraska at the time was going through its own turmoil as well. I don't know. All I know is that Penn State has a lot of decisions to make, and Fitzgerald is a candidate on the list. You never know what could happen, and I think that part is the most fascinating. And what else I think is the most interesting thing about this is the unpredictability of the whole thing. I don't think we're really going to know more about the fallout from this whole James Franklin firing for a couple of weeks or even a couple of months as the team tries to carry forward with 6 games to go and much of the season left, and still a possibility of a bowl game on the horizon. But as I mentioned on ETB Sports earlier this week, and as I also will mention later on when Forever Power 5 comes out later today, that Penn State schedule is now an uphill battle all of a sudden. and you lose Drew Aller for the year, that's some bad news right there. So not looking good in Happy Valley, but certainly if Pat Fitzgerald is a candidate, it's not only an outlier, it's extremely, extremely intriguing. So just something to note there as well. Let's go over the biggest college football takeaways. Let's see. Let's go over the biggest college football takeaways from week 7. All right, so looking ahead to week 7, or excuse me, looking back at week 7, rather, week 7 was a wild week in college football. Week 7 was one of those weeks that you can't seem to. It'll never get out of your memory. It was a crazy weekend. It had a lot of fun games. Indiana versus Oregon was one of them. Obviously, Indiana going on the road in Eugene, winning by 10 to establish itself as a number 3 team in the nation. Of that, number 1 is Ohio State. Number 3 is now Indiana. That is fascinating. Oregon is also in that mix as well. There's a couple other teams in there too that are fascinating. USC is ranked again. Somehow Illinois isn't ranked, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That's one that I don't necessarily agree with. We will talk about that. We'll talk about Northwestern's upset over Penn State. That was the most shocking upset of the weekend. No doubt about it. And then, of course, just kind of looking over, USC beating Michigan was gigantic, doing it at home and just dominating Bryce Underwood. That was fun. What else was there? What else was there? Yeah, I'd say week 7 overall was a solid week. I think one of the things that was the most interesting though was the fact that there was just a ton of parity. I mean, there was a lot of parity. There were some teams where you didn't know how they were going to fare. But I think the most impressive team though, and I guess let's just get into it now. Now that we're sitting here on this topic, is Illinois Ohio State, and let's just get into it because I think Ohio State was the most impressive team defensively in this game, and I was there. They were unbelievable. 34-16 was the final score in Champaign. Ohio State wins the game, maintains its number 1 ranking, and of course, just kind of looking at it, it was expected that Ohio State was going to win this game. But the way Ohio State won was the most impressive. 21 points off turnovers was the difference in the game, in my opinion. 21 points off turnovers. Luke Altmaier still was able to throw a touchdown pass in this game. But the major thing that I was almost taken aback by with this was just how dominant Ohio State was. They did whatever they wanted to Illinois defensively. And then offensively, they just shut Illinois down for much of the game. Sonny Styles had a really nice day. And then, of course, just their corners and safeties were all over the Illinois receiving corps the whole game, even though the refs maybe had something to do with it overall. But in a sense, though, I think that Ohio State clearly showed why it's the best team in the country. Illinois being unranked, I guess we can talk about that now too. I don't agree with it. And this isn't even a biased take. I'm just being blunt. They've lost now to the number 1 and number 3 teams in the nation. Okay. And they beat a team who's now in the top 20. I'm not saying USC shouldn't be ranked, but it should count for something that Illinois beat USC head to head. I think that should count for a lot more than what it does. I think Illinois, quite frankly, should still be ranked ahead of USC just on the sole fact that Illinois won the game. It's as simple as that. And again, as I said at the beginning of this, they were supposed to lose to Ohio State. I didn't have an issue with that. But the fallout from this game, to me, was just astronomically bad. Astronomically bad. You drop from number 17 to out. You drop all the way to number 25 in the coaches poll. Like, what? I don't understand. For a team that was number 9 in the country to be unranked after starting 5-2, and your only 2 losses are to the 2 best teams in your conference. And I get it. One of them was by 53 to Indiana. We know how good Indiana is now. But to me, it just doesn't make sense. To me, it just tells me that these AP voters just aren't watching the games. They're not as in tuned as they should be. Like I do not understand just the level of just lack of just accountability. Like 5-2 is 5-2, and your two best wins so far are Duke and USC. Those are no games to slouch over whatsoever. I don't know. I just think you need to reward the teams that deserve to be rewarded, and I think Illinois is one of those teams that deserves to be ranked right now through 7 games, and hopefully, because they're technically number 26, that one of these teams at the bottom, Nebraska, for example, who's now number 25, maybe Nebraska loses to Minnesota, and maybe next week going into Washington, we're having a different discussion. So I don't know. I don't know. It remains to be seen. But what I do know is there's week 8 of college football. So let's talk about it. Week 8, excuse me, specifically in the Big Ten, Illinois is the only team in the conference that's on a bye, which means all 17 other teams play. Let's go over who's playing in the Big Ten this week to just get a feel for everything, because that's what I want to focus on. All right. So on Friday night, Nebraska goes to Minnesota. Nebraska is the new number 25 team in the nation. That is at 8 p.m. Eastern. Then on Saturday, the day begins with what was going to be Big Noon kickoff. It was switched to BYU versus Utah at the last minute after Michigan lost to USC. So sorry, Ann Arbor, you're not getting Big Noon kickoff anymore. Michigan hosts Washington. That's at noon Eastern. And then, as I was alluding to, in the 3 Eastern window, if you will, in the 3 Eastern window, you have Purdue going to Northwestern to take on a Wildcats team that is pretty good. It's won 3 in a row, and it's one of the better teams in the conference, and it has a chance to gain ground in the Big Ten against a Purdue team that has not looked good the last couple of weeks, and it's free falling right now with only 2 wins overall for the year. In that same window on CBS, number 1 Ohio State continues its road trip. It goes to Wisconsin to take on a Badgers team that may be on the verge of firing its coach in Luke Fickell. And then in that same window on Peacock, Michigan State plays Indiana. Indiana's number 3 in the nation. Could Indiana stop Michigan State? I'm not so sure, but what I do know is it has a chance to be an interesting game if Michigan State shows up. That remains to be seen. Oregon goes to Rutgers. It's a big game for Rutgers. It could be a trap game for Oregon. Who knows? What other games are there in week 8 that are interesting? Yeah, I mean, and then of course the big one, the one on NBC, Notre Dame USC, which should be a great game. That's at USC. That should be a great game. And it could be the last game ever in the rivalry's history. And then of course, how could I forget Iowa plays Penn State this week? So there's some good games. There's some good games overall this week. I do think the best game though is Notre Dame USC, which we'll preview in just a little bit. But what I can tell you is there's a possibility for some upsets this week. Minnesota's no slouch of a team. If PJ Flex guys show up, they'll give Nebraska a game. Purdue, same thing, still learning how to win. Defensively, it's not very good, but when their offense is clicking, they can score some points. So Northwestern better be careful. They might be riding too high off that Penn State win this past week. And then the Penn State-Iowa game, everybody's kind of down on Penn State right now with James Franklin's firing in recent days. Could this potentially mean that Iowa goes in and protects home field advantage at Kinnick Stadium and gets the job done? That remains to be seen as well. But what I can tell you is this. If the morale is low at Penn State right now, just imagine the morale next week after potentially Penn State gets whooped by Iowa in Iowa City. That's not going to be a pretty scene for anybody in State College. Just be mentally prepared for that could definitely be a possibility. Definitely. But what I can tell you is this, though. All of these games are fascinating. They have all of their own stakes and stuff in their own way. And I think that's what makes Week 8 very, very unique. We are going to take a quick time out to hear from our sponsors. Of course, those are Playback and Novig. And we will get back to the show in just a minute after we say our particulars about how much those two sponsors do for myself, the show, and the network as a whole. So we will be back very soon. Have a good one.
Hey fans, Novig is here to change the way you play. Available in 35 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and New York, Novig is America's #1 sports prediction market, and it's 10 times more profitable than traditional sports books because there's no house edge. Instead, you're betting directly against other sports fans just like yourself. Novig is also the only free exchange, which means you keep every dollar you win, whether you're putting plays down on the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, college sports, or even UFC and tennis. Novig gives you the power to pick the best odds, or better yet, set your own. Sign up today with the code ETB Network, and you'll get 1,000 Novig coins plus $5 in Novig cash, and special bonus offers like spending $5 and getting $50 back. Novig, where fans play smarter. You must be 21 years or older to play. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Just wanted to give a quick timeout in the middle of the show to remind you guys that Bando's Breakdowns is presented by Playback. I teased it a little bit earlier that there was an announcement coming, and sure enough, without further ado, here we go. Presented by Playback, watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best to do it together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. And with that, we can get back to the show. Thank you so much to our friends over at Playback and Novig for all they do. And of course, speaking of Novig, Bando's Breakdowns odds are presented by Novig. This week, we're going to be going over one of the biggest games in the entire country. Number 13, Notre Dame, a 9.5-point favorite against USC. The over-under, 61.5, one of the biggest games of the entire year. The loser of this game is more than likely out of the college football playoff discussion. It's a bigger game for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, as Notre Dame already has 2 losses on the year. Its 2 losses are to Miami and Texas A&M, 2 of the best teams in the country. USC, fresh off a win against Michigan, but lost to Illinois in the weeks prior. USC could very well be undefeated at this point in the year, but a loss they are not. I think Notre Dame is going to win this game, and I'm going to tell you why. I think Marcus Freeman, right now, I would take him over Lincoln Riley. It's as simple as that. He has his guys rolling right now. They're running the ball well. Defensively, they look great. I think they figured out their quarterback situation as well. I just think overall they're a very polished team, and I think Lincoln Riley gets too complacent and too comfortable just kind of being Lincoln Riley. And what I mean by that is he's too comfortable sticking to what he knows best when it comes to college football. He doesn't, to me, really take a lot of risks, in my opinion. They could have won that Illinois game. If it wasn't for a few mental errors, USC wins that game by 7 to 10 points. And I'm sitting here today telling you that Illinois is an afterthought. Of course, Illinois is not an afterthought. Through 7 games, they won 5 of them. My point being is that USC is a better football team than what their record and what their ranking indicates. And they showed that against Michigan Saturday night. And they have to do that again if they want to have any chance to beat Notre Dame. I like Notre Dame here to win this game, and I also like them to cover the number. I don't think it's too high of a number either. I think it's a number that is comfortable. I think it's a number that if Notre Dame runs the ball and makes a few key takeaways late in the game, they'll have a chance to wrap it up and do so in a big way. I like Notre Dame this week to get it done over USC and potentially knock USC out of the college football playoff discussion. It would surely be Notre Dame's best resume win to date if the Fighting Irish are able to get it done. So give me Notre Dame to cover the number. I'm not touching the over-under. I think it's too high of a number, but I really like Notre Dame to cover the spread. So let's keep it that way and take the Fighting Irish to beat the Trojans and Lincoln Riley. So there you go. All right, let's talk some NFL. Bears Commanders. Bears win, last second field goal. Jake Moody, Monday Night Football in the rain. Absolutely electric win. Sweet revenge from this past season for the Bears. The Bears, after starting 0-2, are all of a sudden 3-2. Had a much needed week off and got the job done in Washington. Same final score as the Raiders game, 25-24 there. Bears win. The Commanders are a good football team, but again, late game mistakes is what killed this team. And of course, they gave the Bears too much time for Caleb Williams to go down the field and win the game at the very end there. I really liked this Bears win. They were resilient. They didn't take too many crazy risks. They didn't overlook themselves into thinking, oh, we're just going to go in here Monday night, lay down against the Commanders. No, they played to win the damn game, and sure enough, they did just that. I really liked the way the Bears handled themselves, took care of business, beat a very good Washington team, and just made the NFC very interesting. Now, going into this week, they come home and they play the Saints. The Saints were humbled at home by the all of a sudden first place leading New England Patriots, first place in the AFC East meeting. Now they come home and they play a Bears team riding high off the Monday Night Football win. This is a big game for the Bears, and it's a bigger game for the Saints if it wants to save its season any which way. The Saints aren't really going anywhere at the moment, but from a Bears standpoint, this is a game the Bears can't lose. The Bears have a comfortable schedule ahead if the teams in which they're supposed to play kind of stick in their same consistencies. The Saints are one of them. The Bears can't let this one get away. I think the Bears win the game. They'll win it by 10 or 17. I think Roma Dunze is off for a big day. I think Caleb Williams scores 2 touchdowns, and I think the Bears win this game 27-17. I think it's a good home win for the Bears, and it'll start a winning streak that I think a lot of people will be very happy with. If the Bears are 6-4 or 7-3 through the first 10 games of the year, I will not scoff at that whatsoever. Give me the Bears to get the job done again by 10 at Soldier Field on Sunday. Again, a can't lose game for the Bears. It's a bigger game for the Bears than it is for the Saints, but it's a Bears team that is riding a lot of confidence, as it should be. Huge win Monday night. Can they keep it rolling? We shall find out soon. It'll be interesting. That's on Sunday. Let's talk about some Saturday action, though, because this past Saturday, UFC Rio was a pretty good card. Main event saw Charles Oliveira submit Mateus Gamrot. Like I told all of you suckers, that Oliveira would win in the second round by submission, and sure enough, he did just that in front of his home country, in front of his hometown. Unbelievable stuff for the former UFC lightweight champion. I thought it was too quick of a turnaround. I really did. But for some damn reason, Oliveira came out and showed why he is a former champion, dominating Mateus Gamrot. It was a phenomenal display overall. Just super, super, super impressive stuff. The way he was able to take the back in the second round, cinch that rear naked choke in, that was unbelievable. Congratulations to Charles Oliveira for getting the job done. Also, shout out to Davidson Figueiredo holding down the fort for the Brazilian fans, winning in the co-main event against the always tough, always durable Montel Jackson, who will surely be back in due time. It was just a rough out for him, just given the location, all the momentum going into that fight, where he was at in the division. It was a huge, huge spot for him, but congratulations to Davidson Figueiredo. I went 7-5 on this card. We will hope to do a little bit better on UFC Vancouver this Saturday, and the Vancouver card is a pretty good one. So let's talk about it. The UFC takes its talents from Brazil to Vancouver for another international UFC fight night, headlined by a pretty big fight in the middleweight division. Ranier de Ritter versus Brendan Allen in one of the biggest fights at middleweight that could possibly be made. I understand it was not the original main event for this fight. It was supposed to be DeRitter versus Hernandez. Obviously, some circumstances played a factor there as to why that fight is no longer happening, but this is a big fight. So let's go over the particulars of this card before we get any deeper. Again, this Saturday night in Vancouver, the UFC's return to Canada. It's a pretty good card at Rogers Arena. 13 fight card here. And let's look at the main event. Reinier de Ridder, 21-2. Brendan Allen, 25-7. Two of the best middleweights in the sport right now that are not champions. Let's take a look at the resume of Reinier de Ridder, though, just really quick while we're sitting here. In the UFC so far, it's been very impressive. 4-0 for de Ridder as it stands right now. Getting a huge win in his last outing in July by split decision against the former UFC middleweight champion Robert Whittaker. Before that fight, he fought in Des Moines, Iowa in May against a very hyped prospect in Bo Nickel, securing a TKO in the second round. And then before that, Kevin Holland, who also shares the card with de Ridder and Allen this weekend in the co-main event of the evening, fought de Ridder back in January, losing that fight by rear naked choke. And then before that, in his UFC debut last year, defeated GM3. So very, very impressive resume for RDR there, on the verge of a title shot if he can get this win over Brendan Allen. Let's talk about Brendan Allen, one of the most experienced middleweights in the sport, 25-7 overall, as we currently sit, 13-4 in the UFC. Finally got off the schneid with a huge win, unanimous decision win over Marvin Vettori that snapped a 2-fight losing skid that dated back to April of last year. Because before the Marvin Vettori win, his last win was against Chris Curtis. So there's that. He's been in the UFC a while, as I said, 13-4 overall. Very high skill grappler, has a lot of submission wins and some good quality wins. Paul Craig, Bruno Silva, and a bunch of other names as well. It's a high-level fight. It should be one of the best fights of the whole year, championship or not. But I really like Reinier de Ridder to get it done. I just think he's a better grappler overall. I just think he's one of those guys that's a man possessed. I think he really wants a title shot. I think he knows that he's in the UFC for one reason and one reason only, and that's to become champion. And I know my fellow co-host, Jack Gold, is going to disagree with me, but I do not think that Brendan Allen has seen a grappler as good as Reinier de Ridder, which is why I really like Reinier de Ridder in this spot to win this fight Saturday night in the main event, secure a potential middleweight title shot, and do so in impressive fashion. It's a 13-fight card overall from Vancouver. Let's look at a few more particulars before we move on to the very end of the show here. All right, so 13 fights on the card. 4 p.m. Eastern start for the prelims, just like last week, which means it is a 7 p.m. Eastern start for the main card as well. And in the main event, I like de Ridder by submission in the second round. So that is my pick for that fight. All right, let's talk about some news and notes in MMA really quick. Paulie Malignaggi, former boxer, current commentator, went ballistic on the Ariel Helwani show about how he feels about not just Dana White as a person, but Dana White as a businessman in combat sports. Let's take a look at this interview, or this exchange rather, between he and Helwani, and see what we make of it. Again, this is courtesy of the Ariel Helwani show, one of his more recent episodes. So let's listen in.
Let's go back to what we were saying with the Ali Act and whatnot.
And
Dana
Zuffa,
said they've generated Zuffa. They generate billions of dollars. It's great for the sport. The UFC model has shown that it generates billions of dollars. Billions of dollars for who, dude? Not for the fighters. When you're talking, when a guy like Dana White talks about this model generates billions of dollars and so on and so forth. Let's say it did, even for boxing. Let's say if it did. Without the Ali Act, you know what it's going to be, because his resume, his body of work already tells you what it's going to be. His body of work tells you that it's going to be all for the corporate sponsors, all for the big shots, including him, and very little piece of it goes to the fighters. So when we talk about how is this thing going to benefit this or how is this thing going to benefit that, it's not like we're talking to a guy who doesn't already have a prior road, a resume that you can look back on and say, how does he behave? How does he do things? How does he behave financially? This guy robs fighters left, right, and center. You could say allegedly, right? I mean, because you could say, considering the main event purses of UFC fighters compared to what the UFC shows generate, where's all the money going? It ain't the majority of the money ain't going to the fighters like it would in boxing if a fighter generates that kind of money. But yet then this guy goes on a Joe Rogan podcast and he'll talk about how he lost $1 million in one night. Money that he's robbing from fighters. All right.
So, I mean, he's not totally wrong in a sense, but unfortunately, I do think that is the risk that comes with being a professional fighter. You have to know that it is unfortunately the business model that the sport is currently in. Will it change in boxing? I'm not so sure, but what I do know is I think Paulie still has a grudge from the Mayweather-McGregor fight years ago and how that played out. So I think not only was he taking his frustration out on that, but he was also taking his frustration out on just MMA media in general and so on and so forth. It was not the brightest look from Malignaggi there, just in terms of a professionalism standpoint. I was not the biggest fan of this whole interaction between he and Helwani. So just something I thought I would plug there as well. Let's round out the show, though. One thing that I saw, a woman in Urbana, I think it was Urbana, one of the smaller towns within the Champaign area, yeah, has a hobby, and that hobby is she likes to make gifts for people, particularly pillows. And WCIA, who's the local CBS affiliate, as well as the local ABC affiliate now that I'm thinking about or ABC, I'm pretty sure, did a piece on this where the woman made a pillow for none other than Bret Bielema, and it did like an orange and blue pillow, and added a note, and Bret saw it and wrote her a handwritten note to tell her thank you for the gift. And I just thought it was a super cool pillow overall. I just thought it was a very nice gesture, and I just think it's cool that she did enough to where it made him happy. And I'm sure, following that USC win on homecoming, it was just awesome. I was there, and it's cool to see that there's now been a lot of positivity off that. And this was just another example of it. So shout out to that woman. Shout out to Coach for accepting the gift. And I just thought it was awesome. And then finally, Zain Zinger. And I'm going to keep it brief. And I'm just going to say it because I heard it. I was at Bielema's availability this week off the bye, as I said in my in my intro earlier in the show, rather. And yeah, I think college football rankings need to be reassessed. It's as simple as that. I think I think the AP poll is doing a disservice to some of these teams. Can somebody please explain to me what Nebraska has done to be ranked? Can someone explain to me how not viewing head-to-head games between teams that are ranked in the AP poll even matters? Because if it didn't matter, I think Illinois would still be ranked. And if it didn't matter, Nebraska would be higher than number 25 because they beat Cincinnati in the first game of the season. My whole point in saying this is, what are we doing? It needs to just be the College Football Playoff Committee. And as my co-host alluded to a couple weeks ago, the rankings at this point just don't matter. You play the games you're assigned, and you win or you lose, and it needs to be more of a standings thing. But nonetheless, I digress. That's going to do it for Bando's Breakdowns episode 64. Thanks so much for tuning in. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. One final reminder, please be sure to listen to Bando's Breakdowns or your podcast. That's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, and so much more. Again, would be greatly appreciated if you guys added me to your RSS feeds. That way you didn't miss a single episode. For everybody at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, I'm Zain Bando. Again, this has been episode 64 of Bando's Breakdowns. We will be back with episode 65 next week for more goodies, a full-on preview of Illinois, Washington, and so much more, including UFC 321 as well. So until then, have a great rest of your week and have a great weekend as well. And I will see you guys soon. Have a good one.
Bye.